so people can start joining in. So, and so Heather, I know that you in your bio, of course, you're talking about doing some work in a startup in DC. And so, and you worked with intelligence over there, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I worked for the intelligence community across several different of the agencies. Yeah.
How fun.
Yeah.
And then and just doing the like the visualization, the what do they call you were saying just a moment ago about the visual modeling, or
Yeah, so there's lots of different names for it. It's under the umbrella of a visual practitioner would call themselves a visual practitioner. If they're graphic recording, they're simply drawing on the wall as other people are speaking, whereas graphic facilitation is actually using visuals to take people through a facilitated process. But yeah, that's the type of work I was doing. I was living here in Durango, and I'd been in Durango for close to 20 years off and on. And I learned this skill set while I was working at KornFerry. Some of you remember that they had an office here, and I was in leadership development. And so for me, I was a graphic designer, but I wanted to be in the room where change was happening. I wanted to be in where big decisions were being made. And I overheard someone a few cubicles away say, oh, we had a graphic recorder come into our meeting and write things down. It was really helpful for us to be able to do this change management piece. And I went, that's what I want. So I started studying, and of course, I couldn't find any work in Durango. So I started to travel and do the work on the side. And I had this dream that I wanted to build a team. And so I put together what that team would look like. And I proposed it to two companies, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. And the one on the West Coast, unfortunately, was during a hiring freeze. So I ended up on the East Coast. And I started what's called the Visioneering team with a couple of my colleagues in Washington, D.C. for a company at the time was called OG Systems. And it since has sold to Parsons Engineering.
Ah, wow.
Yeah.
Fun.
So quite a story.
Yeah, a good story. And I hope you don't mind saying it twice, because we're gonna when we start.
Oh, I've got it. It can just continue, actually. I don't know if we're still recording. That could be on the. Yeah.
Great. So just for our people that are joining in, we're going to get started here in just about 2 minutes as we kick things off and our hosts join. And here is Sumit. Hi, Sumit.
Hi, Sam.
Good to see you. So Sumit, I'd like to introduce you to Heather, our speaker for today.
Hi, Sumit.
Hi, Heather. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for your support in getting here today.
Just made it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, it's getting a bit late where you're at, Sumit, isn't it? So in India. But
absolutely.
So
hi, Wendy. Hi, Char.
Hi, Sumit. How are you?
Good evening, Sumit.
And so, Char, tell us about the sun in Mexico.
It is lovely. It's like in 80, it's like 81, 82 at all times.
Nice.
And I have a bunch of plants around my house, and they just grow like crazy. So it's very refreshing. I don't mean to make you jealous.
It's always good to get a weather update from across the world, right? So that's good.
Yeah, it definitely changes. I feel like I live on a different planet.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get things kicked off here in just 1 second. Hello, Howard.
Hi there. Hi, Heather. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Howard.
All right, and just kicking off the streaming or multi-stream. It looks like we are live. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to the People Strategy Forum. We're have a special guest today, Heather Martinez, which is going to be talking to us about leading inspired meetings with appreciative inquiry. So a lot to learn there. I know many people out there have not heard of appreciative inquiry before. So we're going to enlighten you, and Heather's going to tell us all about how important it is to really drive those effective meetings. So, but really quick here to tell you a little bit about what People Strategy Forum is all about. We're here to elevate the practice of talent practices and people strategy as to encourage leaders out there to develop better organizations where people can be happier, and when people are happy, they create better work, and it also creates better clients, or happier clients and customers. So it's important to have those create those environments that cause people to thrive. So today we're joined by a series of hosts here. We have Howard Nizewitz, who is a systems and rewards expert. We have Sumit Singla from India, who is a people strategist, has worked in a lot of large consulting companies, has his own practice in India, and we're fortunate to be able to leverage his skills here at CompTeam as well. So thank you, Sumit. And we also have Char Miller. Char Miller is a serial entrepreneur and a global traveler. She's in Mexico right now enjoying the sun, and all of small business coaching and also career development and so forth, career coaching for people. She's an expert on that. Then we also have Wendy Graham. Wendy Graham is a great trainer. She's a TMA expert and practitioner, and so she's does a lot of things that help me out in marketing and so forth. So I'm really appreciative of Wendy. She brings in some great speakers here on the People Strategy Forum, and that includes Heather herself. So welcome, Heather. I mean, it's a pleasure to have you here. I know that you come with a great deal of experience. You started working at KornFerry in 2011 as a visual practitioner, and became a co-founder at a startup in DC a couple of years ago, and now you have expanded your own practice. And so love to hear about your journey there. But I'm really inspired because I have a daughter that just loves art, and she's been told by a number of her aging grandparents and so forth that you can't make any money in art, and all this kind of stuff. And so I'm getting ready to challenge that assumption that there's plenty of career opportunities out there for people that use that special part of their brain to enlighten us all and create beauty on this planet. So please tell me about your journey and how you started out and how you got to where you are now.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to try to do this quickly, but not speak so fast that no one can understand me. And thank you for saying that, because I love to be an advocate for the arts. I wear a lot of hats, as you know, and so you're going to see some of those hats come up as I talk about my journey. And one of them is also an arts coach. So I'd love to speak with your daughter about how to make that happen and make that dream come true. I actually started out with an art major, and I went to a business school because my father wanted me to learn about business. And I was majoring in business, and then I took a couple of art classes, and I took enough classes to be a dual major, except I had to choose between having a Bachelor of Science or a Bachelor of Arts. And I couldn't decide, but I was one credit away from being an art major. So I went ahead and went with the Bachelor of Arts, but I have enough business classes under me to also have a bachelor in business administration. So I guess I started out that way. And I then left college, and I decided I was never going to take a job that wasn't art related. So I became a graphic designer, worked in some print shops, landed a job in Durango, Colorado here at KornFerry as a graphic specialist. And that was my first corporate job. And I felt like sort of a desk jockey, right? I was stuck to my desk. I was doing all of these visuals, and I wanted to be in the room where really important decisions were happening. I would see people all go into the room and then come out, and then they would give me something to make a visual that described what happened in the room. And I thought, why don't you just let me in the room? And so a few days later, or sometime later, I heard someone in a nearby cubicle say, we hired a graphic recorder to come in and write down what we were saying, and it helped us with our change management initiative. And I said, that's what I want. So I Googled graphic recording. I found Christina Merkley online. She was writing out her visual history, and I immediately signed up for every class I could get. In fact, I was deciding at that point, I was in a place where I wanted some change, and I wanted to go to grad school. So I decided to take all that money that I was saving for grad school, and I invested in myself to become a visual practitioner, graphic recorder. But then I had a dream that I wanted a team of people. So I put together a proposal and I sent it to 2 different companies, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. The one on the East Coast accepted it, and I went to Washington, D.C. to help build the Visioneering team. I was one of the founding members, the art director, and also the Scrum Master. So I can put on my hat when it comes to software development as well. And in that time, I was doing graphic recording, but quickly had to jump into facilitation. And it's not what I planned. It's not what I wanted. I wanted to be the silent partner in the room, drawing pictures and writing words. And all of a sudden, I was in a position to be a facilitator. And I thought, I need a modality. And appreciative inquiry was something that I had been reading about. And I finally got to study at the Center for Appreciative Inquiry to become a certified AI facilitator. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that brings us
Yeah,
to
that's-
somewhat now. Yeah. Actually,
Yeah,
that
so
was
can
about
you-
6 years ago.
And can we dive in a little bit more about what it is to be a graphic recorder and how it helps engagement in these sessions?
Absolutely. So one of my hats is that visual practitioner. Graphic recording has really changed since I started. Since I started, there were just a few schools out there that were teaching the philosophy. Now a lot of illustrators have sort of penetrated the market. And so the outcomes are very different depending on the recorder that you hire. Do you hire someone to capture what was said so that it can be put on social media or used for internal branding? Or are you working with a graphic facilitator who really holds the facilitative process and can create visuals that support that process so that you can reach the desired outcomes or the purpose for the meeting? And so if you can imagine being in a conference room or at a conference, they graphic recorders and visual practitioners can show up anywhere, and they usually are either working digitally with their work displayed on a big screen or projected, or they could be working on really big pieces of paper. Maybe imagine a 4x8 sheet of paper that gets filled up in an hour with either a presentation or a facilitated conversation. Yeah.
And then, but is it used in maybe a smaller scale aspect where people can leaders can use facilitate meetings with that type of approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done everything from TED Talks to working one-to-one with directors of agencies where we're planning out what a certain offsite is going to look like and who's going to be facilitating different sections of it, and then what kind of visuals will support that. And sometimes it's just straight graphic recording. So people just writing down what's happening with pictures in a way that can be mnemonic, can be remembered and used as a change management tool. And other times we have to have a really hard conversation. So we might use techniques like speak through me or ways to get people to talk about it. And then we have to be very careful about what's written down so that there's no attribution, but at the same time, people feel like they were being heard. So it can be used in literally every circumstance. I've used it in just about any scenario. Yeah. With any size group. Yeah.
That's great. And could you tell us a little bit more about how you've used your talents and you've developed the Tech Host Academy? Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you help others?
Yeah, absolutely. So the visuals, that got me into the meeting, right? And the facilitation really got me to help lead the meetings. And then when the pandemic hit, of course, we were all shifting to working online. And I had been teaching online for a couple of years already, training folks. And it was a very natural position for me to help people. And what I was noticing is I would sit in a meeting and whoever was leading the meeting, if I were just attendee, I would start taking notes about how I would make this meeting better. And then I wrote a 20-page playbook on what to do before, during, and after a meeting to just make it a better meeting. And then I went, I think this is called tech hosting. And I asked around and people were like, yeah, tech hosting, tech producing, whatever. And then I started talking to different tech hosts, and a lot of them would say they were just tech hosts because they didn't have a lot of equipment. They didn't have a lot of, they weren't like a show producer. And so I started to delineate for myself what that meant. And I started a class, I call it Tech Host Academy, where I train people to help, whether they are helping a small creative group or they are a hybrid worker or, working from home, working on hybrid teams, or if they're really want to train up to become on a team of tech hosts to deliver at conferences, which I've done that too. And I've trained people up to get to that point. And so for me, the basis of everything I do, from graphic recording, facilitation, teaching and training, and tech hosting, is based in appreciative inquiry. So I created, using the appreciative inquiry framework, I created a whole course around tech hosting so that we really focused on the engaging, efficiency, and equitable parts of meetings.
So let's talk a little bit more about that, because a lot of people out there, like I mentioned before, are wondering what appreciative inquiry is. And so can you tell us a little bit about that theory and practice?
Absolutely. And I have a graphic here because I'm a visual person, so I'm just going to have to show you. This is the first graphic that I actually drew before I became a facilitator, and I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can see. And it was before, it's called the 4D process. Now it's changed, it's now the 5D process, but discover, dream, design, and deliver. And this was a template that I would use, and I still use to this day, in my discovery meetings with clients. But I'll go through the 5D process just so that everyone can get familiar with it. And there's some fun quotes here. So the first two, and I put them together, define and discover. These two phases, the first one is define. What is the purpose of this meeting? What are we trying to do in the session or in this particular project? What are the basics, right? What's the vision, the mission, the purpose of the organization, the people that are going to be involved, just the basic information. And then we have a discovery meeting. And in the discovery meeting, this is where we learn about the skills and the strengths of the organization or the individuals so that we can build on those to do what's next, which is the dream phase. And the dream phase might sound a little out there, but it's really about creating a vision. Imagine what we could create if we were to build on all of the strengths and the skill sets of the people that are involved. And the next phase is then, I think, is my favorite, and that's the design phase. This is where we take all of the pieces that we know about the purpose, the people, what it is we want to create, and let's design a meeting or a summit or a long project based on those requirements, if you will, to design so that we can meet that desired outcome. That dream phase is where we get that desired outcome. And then after that comes, they call it either the destiny phase, kind of goes along with the dream phase, or the delivery phase. How are we going to deliver this so that we meet our purpose and it's effective? And I love this quote by David Cooper-Ryder. We need to discover the root causes of success rather than the root causes of failure. And so what appreciative inquiry does is it doesn't look at problems, because David Cooper-Ryder, one of the co-founders, believes that we live in the world of the questions that we ask. And if we ask what's the problem, then we're just going to have a bunch of problems. Now, this is a huge paradigm shift, especially when working with analysts and architects and developers, software developers. I spent 3 years in Washington, D.C. working with these people doing appreciative inquiry. And I had to do a lot of guerrilla appreciative inquiry in order to get things done. But that's essentially the 5D process of appreciative inquiry.
I love that. We do a lot of work with the TMA method, which is based on positive psychology. And one of the similarities that you just mentioned is those things that we focus on are those things that grow, right? So
Yes.
if we focus on the negative side of things, then we bring negativity into the system.
That's
So
right.
focusing on those positive pieces is a way to kind of grow things in a positive and robust way. And so I love that. So but I want to back up a bit. I mean, that because I want to understand more about how you came up with you wanting to focus on the appreciative inquiry framework. So let's go back to at the beginning of the pandemic, when we started seeing some people being forced into the remote environment and not knowing how to run effective meetings. And so what were some of the problems that you were trying to solve at that time?
Oh, well, technology, that was the first big hurdle. Is not everybody has the same internet speed, not everybody has the same equipment to use, and they also don't have a dedicated space for working, right? So it was just chaos. There were some people that were trapped in their homes, people all around them, everything was happening. And so that's one thing that none of us could control, but there were some things that we could influence and have control over, at least try to, make some changes in that process. And what I was finding is that people were either there was a lot of chaos, like people were not staying muted to have nice, clean recordings, or people were staying muted and not speaking and not being engaged. And so what I found was because I was also contracting with other companies and asking clients, what do they want out of their meetings? Most bosses were saying, I want them to be productive. Right? That was it. That was the word. That was, if they talked for a little while, productive always came up, or productive was the first thing that they said. And okay, that's great. How do you measure that? And so I was thinking, how does that get measured? And for a boss or, a decision maker, the way that it got measured is how far are they getting their project along? What's the income? There's all these metrics that can be measured around it. But then I thought, there's the personal piece. And, how easy is it to come on to whether you're on a webinar like this or watching a video and multitasking, right? So I thought, well, in order to get people productive, they need to be engaged. And there has to be efficiency around the technology and around how they work together. And there has to be equity in order to do that, right? So I'm going to just quickly show another image, if I will. And I think some of you will be like, okay, we get it. This is definitely, it's a Venn diagram. This is really simple, right? So why do you need a tech host? You need a tech host to help with the participant and engagement, to help with that productivity, and also to learn, because a tech host is going to help you get to that point where you're going to have new technology or a new third-party tool, and you're going to want to learn something. But there's something special that comes out of that. And that is when you have that participation and engagement, and you mix that with learning, that's where the equity comes in. People have the same information to work with. You combine that learning with productivity, that's where it becomes efficient. And when you combine that productivity with participation and engagement, this is where the culture can really thrive. People can build trust, they can contribute, and they can collaborate, right? And so I like to share that particular graphic. Oops. There we go. I like to share this particular graphic because when I was sharing with clients who wanted to hire me, they would say, how are you going to do that? And I would show them that Venn diagram, and they're like, yes, I want all of that. And so that's how I sort of broke it down in order to be able to make what my services, where people were like, how do we even measure what you do, how to make it so that they would want to hire me and to bring me into the meetings to help with those things.
Well, I think one of the big things, and I know it's a huge passion of Sumit's as far as diversity and inclusion and making sure that people have a voice. And so, Sumit, in your experience, I mean, is there what are the problems that you see out there and getting people to be included in meetings and have equal opportunity?
I think remote work has changed a lot of this narrative, Sam. And in a remote environment, it's kind of easy to ignore people who are not appearing on your screen because they're not talking. And it can often become that kind of a cycle where you see 2 or 3 of the vocal people on your screen. And so you keep talking to them and including them, leading to the cycle of exclusion going on perpetually. So I think leaders need to show more intent at including people. And if non-leaders, or if the peer group, if they're calling themselves allies, or if they're calling themselves inclusion advocates, it's their responsibility as well to highlight the people in the team. And for example, for let's say somebody on this call to say, if one of us is not really visible or not really talking, to say that, oh, I believe this person might have some great ideas on this, and kind of putting them on the spot to bring them into the conversation. So I think that's something that needs to happen more often, and it's a very unique virtual world challenge that's cropping up.
I see Wendy has her finger up. She wants to say something.
Well, this came up with a client that I'm working with where they have a lot of more, I'm going to say, people that need to think in order to speak first. And so versus more extroverted folks who are happy to talk, talk it out. And so the client was asking me, how do I get those folks more engaged? And I'm curious about how, again, to Sumit's point, if they're not just speaking up, and how you can invite them to engage, but in a way that's comfortable for them. Yeah. And I wonder about even putting them on the spot, if that actually, so just some of your ideas on how to get people engaged who might be a bit more reluctant, and especially on a camera might make them nervous, or, being in the Zoom. So just any of your ideas on that.
Absolutely. I have a ton of ideas for that. And I definitely want to address what Sumit said, because this is a systemic thing. This is not necessarily a technical thing. So we can do some technical things, and I'll talk about that. But this is a systemic thing that we need to hold our leaders accountable with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that they show up as models to do that. And then there's some ways that they can do that. And I'll talk about how a tech host doesn't have to be just the person that's hired to do this. I believe that we all have a responsibility to do some of the glue work in order for us to stick together. And I also think that leaders can do this as well. If a leader is starting a meeting and they're saying, okay, we're going to start the meeting, and they're there to set the tone, they can also do a little bit of tech hosting script. And what I like to say is, we'd like to invite everyone to turn on their video cameras so that we can create a more authentic community here online. Now, we understand if you're eating away from your desk, caring for someone, or if you have low bandwidth, if you need to turn off your video, temporarily. But by making that as an invitation rather than a requirement, I think that inviting in helps people not feel like they're on the spot. Then they can have some choices. And it also puts the responsibility on them. If they're have their camera off and they're not eating, and they're not taking care of someone, and they're not away from their desk, they're being bad. But you don't have to tell them that. You invite them in such a way that they go, I want to be good and I want to contribute, and so I'm going to turn on my camera. And then, of course, you can say, okay, if you have low bandwidth, let's talk about that. We're a company. Let's make sure that you have the speed that you need in order to be online. A couple of other things that are technical is make sure that your faces are well lit. If you have background lighting that's back here that's making your face darker, it actually puts almost like a veil between you and other people. And so bring yourself to the light. I highly recommend, even if I know that this is an investment, but I have a ring light that's fairly inexpensive that's behind my camera that's pointing at me. Now, if I were to turn that off, you would see a lot of light coming from one side. In fact, you kind of see my face is a little bit lighter on this side. For those of you that care about the way you look online, if you have front lighting, you don't see all the wrinkles. So front lighting is great, but it also brings you forward into the conversation, right? If you're also either like this, you're not being seen. So, take some responsibility for yourself to also show up. So that can be helpful. But to go back to your question, Wendy, around how do you call on people? Well, I am married to an introvert who says, don't ever call on me. Don't ever make me introduce myself. He's like, I don't even want to be in the room, but he has to be there. But he always has something so valuable to contribute. And he's usually the last person to speak. And then whatever he says is usually what we go with anyway, because he had thought about it the entire time. He listened to what everybody said, and he was like the voice of reason. And so I think if you build in ways for people to contribute early on, that might mean if you're in a big group, you divide up into breakouts and you give people an opportunity to speak. Maybe even design it in a way where each person gets to give an elevator pitch, or they get to say something and then they want reflection. So it's more like share your idea to get feedback, and use a feedback mechanism like something like I like, I wish, what if, right? So I like this about what you said. I wish it could have been, maybe we could do something different like this, or what if I have an idea to add to that? And then that kind of lets off the pressure of you have to have the best idea, or, I don't really want to share it. I haven't thought it through yet. It's like, no, we're here to give and take some feedback. And then, of course, I love at the very end to say, I know someone's been listening. I know someone's been thinking, and they have something really important to say. I wish you would take an opportunity now to unmute and share that. Yeah. So I don't know if that's helpful. If that doesn't scratch the itch, let me know, because I know that's a real challenge to get introverts involved, because they do have very, very valuable insights and contributions, but don't always have the opportunity to contribute.
Well, let me ask
Absolutely.
if I could dig a little bit more with that, because I think this is, I don't know, like statistically, but possibly at least 50% of the population, right, it more prefers to be more on that, on that more introspective side. So, or like need to think before they talk. And so, just some other questions would be like, where's the onus for the engagement? Is it on the facilitator? Is it on the participants? Is it both? And, how do you communicate that responsibility?
That is a
Expectations.
really deep question. A good facilitator would say, does anyone else have any ideas of what that answer might be? Right? I'm happy to say, but I'd love to hear if anyone has something to add to that, or that can contribute to
So
that.
one of the ideas that I use, Heather, and I've been using a lot of this in a class that I'm teaching these days so it's a live class in person, but I've noticed a lot of people are hesitant to speak up because they don't really want to look stupid, or they fear uh, ha- um, expressing ideas which will just sound ridiculous to somebody else. So I use a blend of tech and non-tech interventions. Like I would leave a slide on with a tool like Mentimeter, asking the same question. You can answer it in person if you want to, or you can just type out a response. So some of the introverts will end up typing it in, and then I can call upon them to provide more information, saying, hey, I think that's a fantastic idea. I'd like to hear more. Uh, so whoever put that in, would you want to elaborate, or does anyone else want to build on this idea? And you can do it on chat, you can do it it live. So it works both ways, where you feel encouraged and you feel included in the conversation. At the same time, as an introvert, you can retain your unwillingness to stand up and speak in front of the class. And I've
Oh,
seen
I
this
love
work
that.
in virtual meetings as well.
Absolutely. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for adding. And I have to say that I always have something to say. I always have something to add, and I don't want to take up any air in the room. Because what happens is, as soon as that spotlight's on me, I get flush, I get nervous, my armpits get sweaty, and I forget what I was going to say, but I know I had a great idea. So I want to type it in the chat, or I want to have a tool like you're saying, a third-party collaboration tool. Mentimeter is excellent. It's easy to use. Mural, Miro, any of those things where we can go and put our ideas out there and then maybe talk about them later if they're relevant. Now, I had to learn the hard way in corporate. I went in my first corporate job. I was emotional. I cried. I talked too much. I was absolutely all the wrong things at that time that I was supposed to be. And I created a filter for myself. Is what I'm about to say timely, relevant, valuable? And I would just ask myself that. And for a long time, I went from talking too much to not talking at all. And because I made myself think about those things, it helped me formulate the words that I wanted to say, so that when I was asked to say something, or when I did have the opportunity to say something, I was ready. And so I just wanted to relate to those folks who are like, I don't want to look silly. I don't want to look stupid. I get physical feelings when I have to speak in front of people and share my ideas. It doesn't happen to me so much when I'm facilitating, because it's a different role. But I think having creating and building in an opportunity the way you said is so very important. Anyone else? How would you help engage introverts, or help keep people engaged in a meeting that may need the opportunity to speak up?
Well, I've had my experience of facilitating these kinds of meetings, particularly when I was a facilitator between like a physician group and then the insurance group, where I had executives from both sides of the spectrum. And at times it was so contentious because our for example, outcomes were going on the down end, right? So all of our the and I won't get into the specifics of the business, but everything was negative. Everything was a concern. Everything was anxiety, fear, anger, contention. It was blaming each other in different silos. And so, and also I am a talker, actually. People that know me know that. But I think definitely taking back and taking the time to listen, first of all. I think what I would do in those types of facilitatory discussions and organizational effectiveness is I would prepare for those meetings in one-on-ones with each of the members in that particular group, kind of using more of a positive psychology approach to tease out or dialogue about what their intentions were for this meeting and what kind of outcomes were they hoping to achieve, including the introverts and the extroverts, and doing some positive coaching prior to the meeting, and getting to know that individual on a personal level. So when it came time to actually facilitate, instead of focusing on, all the problems and what do we need to fix, and, this is bad and this is negative, and it's probably, a certain employee that needs to be fired, or this department needs to go, because usually HR hears that. But to facilitate and talking about what do we need to do to grow, to expand, what are the possibilities, what's the vision, and actually calling upon that person, because I've already had the conversation with them, and asking them those inquisitive questions to prompt that individual to share. But it took homework. It wasn't just pulling, 40 leaders in a room and just trying to get them all to positively, speak and in a very positive way and problem solving way. I mean, it took a lot of preparation and relationship and authenticity to talk to each of those leaders prior. So thus, they had more trust in me as a facilitator. And also I was able to hone in on their individual concerns. And by the end of the session, I assured that everybody had a voice. So that's just one of my techniques that I've attempted to do. And then when I started my own companies, I've done the same thing. And it made a tremendous difference. So those are just my 2 cents on what I think about how to prepare.
Wow.
And-
Well, that's a real powerful there, Char. I'm glad you brought up that nugget because I have gone into several meetings myself with some clients recently and have found that they have done zero socialization on some of the topics that they felt very strongly about. And it's completely sidelined our progress going forward. And so doing that stakeholder management, as you mentioned, I think is super critical. Especially like you said, brilliant. Doing homework ahead of time, talking to those people that are going to be in the meeting, understanding their point of view, identifying allies for your topic, that you can, those influencers that can make the meeting go much smoother. What do you think about that, Heather?
I think, Char, that was brilliant. And I think if we were to break it down to what is the core reason behind that, the what is behavioral change. We can't make change in our organization without behavioral change. And then the why is because we want to meet that desired outcome, because we're here to solve or create something that we all agreed to come here and work to do. But what you got into were the really great how-tos of how to get there. And it does take time, and it takes work, and it takes effort. And there are some cases where some people just aren't willing to change, but they also have to have the opportunity to do that. That means the system that they're living in, the system that we live in our organizations, have to give us that opportunity. And I think that comes down to culture. So when we answer Wendy's question about who's responsible for that, this is a cultural question. This is everyone's responsible for how they show up, how they behave, and how to be and contribute to a meeting. So some other ways to do that in the meeting, which I have to tell Char, she's doing the hard work. That is like the hardest thing to do. And that's not something I do as a facilitator. I'm the person in the meeting. So we come up with agreements. What are our agreements today? Not ground rules, but agreements. What are we going to agree to? Because this is what we aspire to. What is it we want to accomplish today, and how are we going to get there? And it's not about no cell phones. It's about we're going to be engaged. It's not about no backtalk or no idea is a bad idea. It's about we're going to share openly so that we can be effective. And I think what happens when we use words that come from a positive psychology place, we can actually feel that differently in our bodies. And then that helps us be able to behave differently. It's like, whoa, I feel different. I'm going to behave differently. Oh, this is a different kind of meeting. I can show up in a different way. I have an opportunity. I feel the trust and the support in this room. So I think it really comes from everybody. And I think it's about building a space. And I'm very careful to say safe space. I want to say safer space, meaning that we can't have a truly safe space for everyone, but we can try to make the safest space that we can. Yeah.
That issue of trust is critical, because, you know, if you can't establish the trust, I've seen it in organizations, people just don't want to speak up, either from prior, issues and evidence of where things were used against people. So, you know, creating that safer environment, as you said, is so important.
Yeah. And I don't know about the rest of you, but in my head, I kind of live a Saturday Night Live life. Like I have these little scenarios in my head where I think everything is funny. I find humor in so much. So when I'm facilitating, I have to be careful not to laugh. And I'm not laughing at someone or laughing at their idea. I'm laughing at this story I'm telling myself in my head. And so that's just another thing, is people don't want to share their ideas because they're afraid someone's going to laugh at them. They're afraid that they're going to be embarrassed. So I think that how we show up is not just how do we actively show up, but how do we show up in a receiving mode where other people feel like they can speak and contribute. Yeah.
I also think that there's some behaviors, and I'm guilty of this, okay? But just interrupting, interrupting people, and particularly more of an introvert that is just trying to convey their opinion, and everyone's pseudo listening, and then they want to drive their point home, and bam, interrupt, take it on a completely different rabbit hole. That individual just shuts down that originally was trying to convey their idea. And they just cross their arms and say, you know, screw it. I mean, I guess apparently my opinion doesn't matter. So, you know, I feel those kinds of ground rules, I think, like we were talking at the beginning, are so critical. How do we respectfully not do that to one another?
I don't want to interrupt. So, but I want to give some thought to that. I want to give some ideas around that. And so why do we interrupt? I think we interrupt because we ourselves are not heard, right? I interrupt because I get excited about what someone's saying and I want to add to it. And they may take that the wrong way. And you're right in that the first thing they do is they lean back and they cross their arms. I said what I've said. No one's listening. I'm just going to lean back. Another thing that people do when they get interrupted is that they do this with their own mouth. They'll go, oh, sorry, I was talking. I shouldn't have been talking. That's not true. It's just that someone interrupted you and you felt shame. Another thing that they do is they will start talking and then they'll say, so they're creating space for themselves in the room. And I'm only sharing this with everyone here because if you tend to interrupt, these are some like physical things that you can see and then go, maybe I need to be quiet for a minute, right?
Yeah.
Great pointer.
I love doing our forums because we even interrupt each other all the time, right?
Because we're excited.
Yeah, we're excited. But we're also very excited about our expert guests such as you and listening to your points of view. But yeah, I think culturally, I think a lot of companies deal with that. And I think it'd be helpful to learn your perspective on how do we curb that culture so that we can have that safety. If we want to interrupt, how do we do that respectfully, courteously, and honor the other person's ideas and what the points they're trying to convey? You know?
Do you know what this is?
It's a paddle. It's a ping pong paddle.
No, it's not quite a ping pong paddle, but that's a great guess. Now I want to play ping pong.
The lollipop.
That's what I was going to say.
This is a red dot. It's just simply a red construction paper dot on a stick, right? And so what I wanted to say was, how do we do that is we set some meeting principles. So beyond the agreements, because some people are just like checking their cell phone, checked out during the agreement part, they're not really paying attention. They're waiting for the meeting to start. They're waiting for the other people to agree on what we're going to do. And then we're going to put that, that flip chart over there and then get to the meeting, right? But I like to, after I do agreements, I like to say, okay, now I want to talk about a meeting principle called the red dot theory. And the red dot theory is, and this actually comes from The Primes, if any of you know the book The Primes by Chris McCoff, and he was in Washington, D.C., and I got to work with him a couple of times, and I love his book. If you go to the website, I think it's theprimes.com, he actually has videos where he explains all of these. And Red Dot Conversations is I like to use his theories to set up and set the tone for the meeting and say, okay, what kind of meeting do we want to have? Do we want to have a usual meeting, an available meeting, or an extraordinary meeting? And of course, everybody wants to have an extraordinary meeting, but they haven't had one in a while, so they're not going to believe it's going to happen. The usual meeting means that we're going to have the usual conversations like, how are you? I am fine. How's the weather? The kind of stuff you say in an elevator, right? Because you're not going to get too in depth. But then you can have available meetings where it's like, look, the 6 of us or however many of us are here today are here together. So what kind of questions what kind of conversations can we have that we can't normally have with other people? But then we are going to have an extraordinary meeting. We're going to have to ask questions we never asked and share things we've never shared in order to have something extraordinary. So one way that you can interrupt without, hurting anybody's feelings and saying, I have a red dot conversation. I have something so important to say that's going to make this extraordinary. I'm going to hold up my red dot. And so then you pass these little paddles around to everybody, and it gives them an opportunity to facilitate themselves and one another to say, I have something really important to add. And I don't mean to interrupt, but right here. It's also really great when you're not ready to front load something, like I really have something to say. This might be a sensitive thing to say, but I think it needs to be said. It's important. And so I'm just going to say it. In our culture, I would say in the United States and some other cultures, being direct isn't always received well. People like kindness, right? But we can have candor with kindness. And this red dot is just one way for someone who really wants to interrupt, but doesn't want to say all the front stuff first to be nice about it and say, I have a red dot. And if we all agree that this will honor this red dot, now we have a facilitative tool to be able to do that.
Perfect idea.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's in talking about comedy, as you were thinking about that, or talking about that, I was thinking about the what was it? Some movie where they had a men's group in the middle of the wilderness, and you had to hold the stick to be able to speak, and they were passing the stick around the fire,
Yeah, that's the talking stick, and that comes from Native American traditions of them passing the stick around the campfire to take turns.
Is that right? That's great.
So that everyone gets to speak. And that can go back to Wendy's question, is that we're going to have a stick here. Who hasn't spoken that wants to hold the stick? And when you're holding the stick, no one gets to interrupt. That's the rule. That's what we agreed on. That little thing that I flashed there, that's my gremlin. So if any of you have an inner gremlin that reminds you about things, that's the other side. So when I'm holding mine up, I'm like, my inner gremlin's like, I'm keeping an eye on them.
You better not get that gremlin wet.
That's right.
Because it's going to turn into a little monster.
Yeah.
Well, what are some other ideas as far as making, meetings flow more effectively and be more productive? Oh, Wendy, did you have something?
No, go ahead and ask that, and then I've got some questions from our live participants, so we'll get to those.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's a really big question, Sam. I want to actually drill down a little bit because I love meeting approach design and I love creating visuals to do that. So are we talking at the beginning of the meeting? Are we talking about online meetings? Give me a topic, I'll talk about it.
I think it's how to set the stage in an online meeting when you first join in. I mean, I've heard a lot of techniques. I mean, a lot of times people talk about having a moment of socialization where we understand where everybody's at, and then we jump into the session. But what do you find as most productive?
Yeah. And I don't know about most productive, but I'm going to share my favorite way to start a meeting, whether it's a big summit or if it's just a what did we do this week kind of thing. And I'm going to throw, if I can, let's see if I still have my visual here. I'm going to throw this up on the screen. I don't know if you can see it.
And Heather, you're using Prezi for Zoom, correct?
Yes. Yes. You
Okay, I
see
just
that?
wanted
Yeah,
to
right.
let our listeners know
Yeah.
that is a tool you can check out, and probably Heather can show you
Yeah.
lots of great ways to use it. So Prezi for Zoom
Yeah.
is what she's
Yeah.
using to put these things up on the screen.
Yeah, and it's called Prezi Live or Prezi Video. It's weird. It's an app on my computer that says Prezi Video, but when you go to download it, it's Prezi Live. And it's different than the Prezi that we used to use instead of PowerPoint presentations. It actually shows up on my screen here. And I did that so I didn't have to like share my screen or jump back and forth. But to get back to the how do I like to start a meeting is as an appreciative inquiry facilitator, I like to start it out with a positive tone. And a great way to do that is to talk about our accomplishments. Now, I did write a blog post and I can share that with all of you. And maybe we can put it in with the video, I don't know. But for the Center of Appreciative Inquiry, where I created this, it's supposed to be an iceberg. And what I did is before the meeting, I actually asked the director, can you give me some of the accomplishments that you've accomplished over the last year? This happened to be for a larger annual retreat. And so she gave me those accomplishments. Now, we had a bigger purpose in mind, and that was to really make some advances around how do we make this nonprofit thriving, right? So I am going to show you a little bit of the nuts and bolts, if that's okay, some of the sausage making, and then I'll show you how it ends up being a really great way to start a meeting. And so what we did is I separated her accomplishments between people accomplishments, money, programming, narrative, and strategy. And what that aligns with is these are the 5 pillars of the 14 attributes of a thriving nonprofit by Joan Gary. And this is all information that the client gave to me. She said, have you heard of these 14 attributes of a thriving nonprofit? I said, no, I haven't. I asked her to send me the accomplishments. She didn't know that I was going to put these two things together. So somehow the whole page of accomplishments that she gave me, I was able to separate into these pillars. So when I came into the meeting, I said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to celebrate our accomplishments so far. And then I asked everyone in the meeting, what else? And that's where I drew on the outside. I left room on the outside of the iceberg. So this is more interactive. People could actually see what I was saying. I started building trust with them as a facilitator to write down what they were saying. And oh my gosh, they came up with all kinds of wonderful things that they too either personally accomplished or wasn't on that particular list. And so we had that there as a way to really celebrate, what we've done. So we were going into the meeting feeling pretty good. And then we had to literally roll up our sleeves a little bit later. I think I showed this on step 3 is we created a heat map of all of the attributes. It was 20 feet wide. This was an in-person meeting, but we could do this in Miro or Mural, but it was 20 feet long. And I had them using sticky dots to say, how are we doing with each one of these attributes? Are we thriving? Are we surviving? Or is this something we really need to work on? And so at the very end of the meeting, I went back to the visual and I said, okay, we celebrated our accomplishments throughout the entire year. We even did a heat map on where we can improve, but what made us so successful? And by being able to say what's underneath that waterline, and I do recognize that this isn't really how icebergs float because there's always more mass underneath it. And that's another thing is after I drew this, I went, you know what? I should have made a lot more mass because it takes so many skills and strengths to be able to accomplish these things. And so this is the way I like to start out. It's a very simple thing. And I can also put I'll put the blog site for the Center of Appreciative Inquiry. You might have to scroll down a little bit. I'll put that in the chat so you can share that out. But I do the actual how-to steps through this process.
Well, this is great. Thank you so much, Heather. I know we just have a few more minutes left in our discussion. But first of all, before we get to those questions, Wendy, would you mind telling us a little bit about our next week's speaker on the People Strategy Forum? Wendy, can you hear me? Oh,
I'm introducing next week's speaker. Yes.
Tell us about Michelle Stewart.
Yeah. I hope y'all will join us next week because Michelle Stewart is going to help us have what we might negatively associate as a confrontation, but make it a positive, a positive interaction. So being able to coach our folks through having a confrontation that feels positive, because it can just take so much courage to even have these conversations. And how can we have them and then have it feel positive for all the parties involved, as well as accomplish the goal that we're trying to to get to, which is really help them improve, develop, and hopefully retain them. So I hope you'll come back next week, because Michelle's going to give us some out of the box ways to have confrontations that feel positive.
I think that's super important, especially in this context that we were just talking with Heather, and having a positive approach to these things with, like appreciative inquiry. So I think there's a lot for us to learn there. So Wendy, I know that you also had some questions from some of our listeners.
Well, first of all, Heather, I did want to just also share some feedback, some positive feedback that we got, which was just, Nikki said this is such a comprehensive and creative approach for virtual engagement. So thank you for that. And just lots of other folks saying, great tips, thank you. And then we did have a question come in, which is meeting principles is great. What type of training would you recommend for groups that are very diverse, culturally, educationally, because tones can be misinterpreted at times?
Ooh, that is tough, because there are so many different kinds of trainings out there, right? So I would love for anyone else in the chat to put things in there, but if anybody on this panel has an approach, my approach has been, I got trained through the Center for Appreciative Inquiry. So for me, that's really my go-to, and I pull from a lot of different modalities, but that's my main thing, and I've found it to be helpful because it is so very universal, right? But I'd love to hear what other folks think, because I know we've got great knowledge in the room. That's my way of saying I don't have all the answers.
I was thinking, just what comes to mind is, maybe you have to do some pre-work, pre-activities, icebreakers, like to build trust around this diversity. And I was thinking of a tool that I work with a lot, which is the TMA tool. And it's even just diversity in how we think about things, how we approach life, what we value, what our talents are, what are our passions. And so being able to come together and know ourselves, but learn about each other and really have appreciation for that difference and why it matters and why we need that diversity of thought, why we need the cultural diversity. So I would say with this, it's like you probably have to plan some fun and interesting, almost get to know you, build trust activities in order to address that. That's a good question.
Anyone else?
And maybe playing in with the red dot is that we're going to assume the positive, that everyone here, we are all marching towards the same end goal. And that if something is said, let's take like the high road, let's assume positive intent when we're trying to, even sometimes we're changing our language. And so sometimes we say the wrong things that we're trying to improve on. But if everybody can sort of see that, yeah, we're all making an effort to try to be respectful of cultural and educational and other differences. So maybe that red dot is a kind of like a, we're really trying, we're all making a best effort.
I think you're onto something there when you talk about making sure that everyone has agency and everybody is contributing. And I put in the chat that personality assessments can be helpful if and when they are embraced by the entire organization. We can better understand ourselves. We can better understand each other. A really intense exercise is called a Johari window. And that's where we learn about ourselves, learn about others, what other people think of us. And then there's a space in our life where we don't understand who we are, and we need to accept that part, that we may show up in ways that we don't anticipate with others. But you bring up a really important point, is that there's lots of how-tos, but I think you have to have agreement from everybody that we're going to do this. As far as training goes, I'm sure there's plenty out there for us to be able to learn this, but I think it really comes from creating a culture where we really do want to make an effort to accept diversity. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. This has been such a rich conversation, and I appreciate you coming on the forum here and sharing it with all our listeners. For those that have more questions and want to reach out to you about your services and learn more, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of different ways, and I shared this in the chat. Not sure if I can share this out broader, but I put a link in the chat for an AI template. And so that's a really great way if you want to learn how to ask the right questions. And when I say right, I don't think there's ever any perfect question, but you're getting closer to that. And that'll put you on my email list if you want to hear more from me. And then, of course, you can email me anytime from my website. And I have a couple. So techhostacademy.com is where I do my tech hosting from. Viscoach.com is where I do a lot of my visual coaching and also facilitation work. And one piece that we didn't talk about, which I'm actually known for in my circles, is lettering. And so letslettertogether.com is another website. And I actually teach trainers and facilitators how to improve their handwriting when they're in the front of the room, writing on flip charts and whiteboards and things like that. Yeah. Yes, I'm happy to. And that's where I really love to geek out. That's a lot of fun.
That's
I think that's awesome.
yeah, we have a lot of things to talk about. I think we need to have you back on, Heather. You just have so much to share.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, it's so wonderful. We are at the top of the hour, so we had to close things off. But thank you so much, Heather, for sharing everything. And it's been a truly engaging conversation. So thank you very much.
Just want to remind everybody to save the chat.
There you go. Save the chat, everyone. And then if you're listening to us on the podcast, we'll have all this in the show notes. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining the People Strategy Forum, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.